The old man closed his hand on the shaft of the fire-axe, took one slow breath the way a plane takes one slow shaving off a board, and put the edge through the seam of a warlord's gilt gorget as if he were splitting kindling on a Tuesday morning. The rich duke's mouth was still open around a word when the collar came apart. Snow blew in through the loading ramp and turned pink. He was a widower. He was 62 winters old. The intelligence file on him listed no threat. 6 hours earlier, the air in the little cabin on Heilbronn 4 tasted of wood smoke, cold iron, and the faint animal sweetness of stew that had cooked all day. Wind raked the roof. The wind on Heilbronn 4 raked the roof for 8 months out of every 12, and the snow did not fall so much as travel, sideways, endlessly, patient as an army. Ted Voss set 2 bowls on the kitchen table. He set one across from his own place, in front of a plain black chair he had planed from Bogwood the week Martha died, and he sat down to eat. He did not know that a matriarch of the Vornkal was about to lift her armored knuckles to his door. He did not know that, before dawn, he would need the axe. He ate. Martha had been dead 11 winters. Ted Voss had planed 11 chairs from black bogwood, one every autumn, one for each winter she was gone. They ran the length of the wall in his workshop like a small silent congregation, oiled and lined up by the year, each one a little smoother than the one before it. The first 3 had been rough work, the grief still in his hands. The last 4 could have gone into any parlor in the inner colonies for a month's honest wages. This year's chair sat across the table from him now, warm from the stove, waiting the way she had waited for him 1,000 cold nights back on Terra, back in the city called Duluth, back in a life the man he used to be had walked away from. He had chosen Heilbronn 4 for the winters. That was the whole of it. 940 souls on the whole moon, most of them ice fishers and lichen farmers who did not ask a man's history. The colonial warden came through twice a year and left a stamp on his residency card. Nobody in the last decade had spoken his old rank out loud. He had come to prefer it that way. The wind changed. He noticed it the way another man might notice a bird gone quiet in a tree, a small silence where a small sound had been. His spoon paused above the bowl, the stove ticked. Then a fist knocked, 3 measured strikes, on the outer door. The wind never knocked in 3s. He set the spoon down. He rose. He walked to the mudroom, and he took his time doing it, because taking his time was the only real luxury an old carpenter had left. Behind the woodpile, under a folded blanket, in a case he had not opened in 31 winters, a coil-fed rifle waited in a bath of preserving oil. He did not go to the woodpile. He went to the door. He opened it a hand's breadth, and cold light and blown snow and the smell of something else came in with the wind. 4 shapes stood on his porch. The tallest of them ducked her head under his lintel and did not step forward. Snow crusted her tusks. Snow crusted the black ridge of her brow and the leather thongs at her braid. Beside her, a much smaller shape, waist-high, clung to the folds of her coat with hands that were pale as tallow and clawed like a hawk's. Behind her, another small one leaned on a spear taller than it was. Behind them all, a 4th shape sagged against the porch rail, an elder, silver-bearded to the collarbone, one hand pressed inside a coat that was black with more than snow. The common tongue lazily called her people orcs. The Vornkal had a truer word for themselves, but the tin box at her throat was set for the trade dialect. She spoke, and the box translated after a half-beat delay in a voice that was not quite hers. "We ask for shelter." Ted looked at each of them in turn. He looked longest at the small one clinging to her coat. His mouth thinned. He stepped back from the door. "Come in." The matriarch's yellow eyes narrowed. She had expected a bar, a curse, a wailing appeal to the local warden. She had expected fear. She got a door held open and a chin jerk at the mudroom bench where boots came off. She stared at him. He was not tall. He was not young. His hair was the color of hearth ash. His shoulders under the flannel were the shoulders of a man who lifted things for a living, but he stood the way a stone stood, and he did not look at her weapons. It was the not looking that unsettled her most. "I am called Kroga she said through the box. The translator flattened the consonants into something a human ear could hold, and even so it sounded like small stones in a can. "This is my daughter. This is my son. This is my father's brother, who is dying. Sit them by the stove," Ted said. He was already moving to the pantry. "The elder on the low bench, the little ones under the blanket on the box. You take the chair." He pointed at the extra chair, the one across the table, the bogwood one. Kroga looked at it, and at him, and she felt for the first time in a long time that she had misread a room. She sat. He worked. He did not ask their names again. He did not ask why they had come. He went to a shelf and took down a linen roll and a jar of pale grease and a needle in a strip of leather. He set water on the stove without waiting for permission from anyone. He set a stool in front of the silver-bearded elder and knelt on it as easily as if his knees were not the age they were, and he opened the coat. Kroga hand went to her belt on instinct. She did not draw. She watched. The elder's side was a mess of frozen blood and torn muscle, where a beam round had cut a shallow furrow along the ribs and lodged in the meat below the armpit. The wound stank of ozone. The elder, Torkmalkrun, whose name did not survive the translator, bared his tusks and did not cry out. Ted's hands did. Ted's hands moved. They cleaned, they probed, they cauterized in 3 short bursts of a heated iron. He lifted off the stove one-handed and set back with the other without looking, the way a man sets a coffee cup down on a familiar counter. They stitched, they wrapped. He did not speak for the whole of it, except to say "hold still" once, in the same tone he might have used to a child. The elder, who had earned battle scars in wars whose names Ted had never heard, held still. When Ted stood, his knees popped like dry pine. He washed his hands in a copper basin. He set a bowl of stew in front of Kroga and one in front of each of the cubs, and a smaller cup of broth in front of the elder. He sat down across from the matriarch, in his own chair, and he picked up his spoon again, as if nothing had interrupted him. "You eat," he said, "then we talk." Kroga did not touch her spoon for a full minute. She had come to this moon with a picture in her head. In the picture, this cottage held a frail old woodworker who would weep and bar his door, and she would break the door and take the shelter she needed, and if he lived through the night, she would leave him a coin for the damage in a currency he could still spend, because she was not a monster, whatever the Duke's proclamation said. The old man across from her ate his stew. He was not weeping, he was not barring anything, he was chewing. Slowly, watching him the whole time, she picked up her spoon. She ate. The cubs ate. The elder drank. The stove ticked. Outside, the wind turned itself in a long, slow circle around the eaves and went off to bother a stand of ironwoods farther down the ridge. "You have not asked who we are," she said at last. "You are cold," he said. "You are hurt. You are with children. The rest can wait until you are warm. You have not asked what we brought after us. I heard the shuttle 3 ridges east about the time the sun went down. I heard it not land. I heard it circle. That is not a shuttle looking for a fishing hole." He tore a piece of black bread and dipped it in his stew. "It'll be here before dawn." Kroga set her spoon down. "You are not a farmer. I am a carpenter. You are not only a carpenter." He looked at her over the rim of his cup. He had eyes the color of the sky above the moon at midday, which was to say almost no color at all. He did not answer. He drank. The cubs, who understood only the shape of things and not the words, felt the shape of things around the table shift. The smaller one, Tesh, the daughter, climbed off the box and crossed the floor and, without asking, crawled up into the black bogwood chair beside her mother. She curled into a ball there like an animal that had found a hollow log. Her small clawed hand closed on the edge of the chair. Her cheek pressed to the polished wood. Ted watched her. The lines around his mouth deepened a very small amount. "You keep the chair warm tonight," he said to the child, in a voice that was not quite the voice he had used to anyone in 11 winters. He looked back at the mother. Now, talk." She talked. She told him her clan's name and the number of moons where the Duke's Justicers had swept through her people's holdings in the last cycle, and the names of the elders she had watched die under plasma fire because they were too proud to run. She told him her father had held a treaty in one hand and been shot through it. She told him she had run to Halbrun 4 because it was the last unmarked hole on her clan's map, and her clan's map had been made by a Vonkal who had traveled farther than any human she had ever met. She told him that 11 mercenaries were coming for her before sunup under a banner of a Justicar called Vralkosh, and that Vralkosh did not leave witnesses. He nodded. He did not ask her to repeat any of it. He rose. He put another log in the stove. He walked to the shelf beside the mudroom, and he took down not the beam rifle case behind the woodpile, but a long-handled fire axe that hung from 2 pegs by the door. It was a plain thing, a tungsten head dulled to grey by weather, on a hickory shaft his own hands had shaped in a summer 30 years before. He carried it back to the table and set it across his knees. He took an oiled rag from his shirt pocket and began, in slow, careful passes, to wipe the head. Krogateshvar watched the rag move. "That will not stop plasma armor," she said. "No," he agreed. He wiped. "It won't. Then what is it for?" He did not look up. "It is for the hinge." She did not know in that moment what he meant. She would know before the sun came up. The cubs slept curled in the black chair together, one on the seat and one on the arm, tusks small and pink against the wood. The elder slept sitting up, breathing shallow. Krogateshvar did not sleep at all. She sat by the window with her rifle across her lap, the long muzzle canted at the door, and she listened to the old man not sleep across the room. He did not pace. He did not check the door. He sat by the stove with the axe across his knees, and he polished the head with the slow patience of a man who had learned patience the hard way. Once, about the 3rd hour of the middle watch, she asked him without turning her head, "Have you killed before, Carpenter?" The rag paused. The rag started again. "Yes, many?" The rag paused a second time. He did not answer. She did not ask again. Outside, the wind found a new note in the eaves. She let herself, for a heartbeat, wonder what she had brought into this house. Then she heard the first engine. It was the low bruising thrum of a lift fan skimming below the ridge line to stay out of the moon's thin radar bands. She was on her feet before the second engine joined it. She crossed to the window in 3 strides. Blue running lights winked once through the falling snow at the tree line, 400 meters out, and vanished. "They're here." Ted was already up. He was already at the door. He had shrugged into a Macintosh coat that smelled of pine tar and old wood shavings. He was tying the throat cord with one hand and holding the axe in the other. "Stay in the shed," he said. "The stove shed, not this room. There's a viewing slit in the north wall. Take the elder and the cubs. Bar the door from inside. They will come through the walls. They'll try. They'll come in a wedge through the front. The wedge is what the intel man told them to expect from a woodworker. Let them come in the wedge. You cannot fight 11 of them with an axe." He paused, one hand on the latch. He looked at her over his shoulder. In the firelight, the lines on his face were very deep. His eyes were still that colorless winter sky. "I don't need to fight them all at once," he said. "I need to fight the first one at once, then the next." He opened the door. Cold poured in. He stepped out. The door shut behind him. Krogateshvar, matriarch of a clan 4,000 strong, before the Duke put a match to it, stood in a widower's kitchen and understood that she had misread the room by more than she had thought. She moved. She dragged the sleeping cubs into the shed. She half-carried the elder. She barred the door and pressed her eye to the viewing slit in the north wall, and she watched. The mercenaries came exactly as Ted had said, a wedge. 11 figures in plasma armor stepped out of the tree line in a lazy formation, blue running lights on the shoulder plates blinking in soft time, faceplates on and grinning behind the black glass. At the point of the wedge walked a taller shape in a longer coat, an ornate helm curled with mock horns, A plasma caster braced against the hip like a walking stick. Vral Kosh, the justicer. He was laughing. Krogateshvar could not hear the laughter, but she could see the shoulders of him shaking. They laughed because their maps said this cottage belonged to a 62-year-old carpenter. No threat listed, no prior military service on record. The nearest colonial warden outpost was 1,100 kilometers south. They laughed because they were about to have a warm room and a small pile of orc children to kill and a bounty in triple-signed script to split among themselves before breakfast. And because their armor could shrug off small arms fire from any weapon a fisherman would own. They did not laugh when the first of them lost his head to a fire axe. He walked ahead of the others by 3 paces. He was the point man because the point man drew fire, and he was the newest. He did not draw fire. He was walking past a stack of split cordwood beside the porch, casting his helmet lamp across it in a bored arc when the cordwood moved. Or rather, one piece of it, a shape, the exact color and posture of a leaning length of stovewood. Macintosh coat pulled around it, motionless in the moonlight, stepped forward and swung. The axe hit the seam between the pauldron and the neck ring at the precise angle a woodsman splits a knot, not against the grain, but along it. The plasma armor's shoulder plate was a masterwork of layered alloys and energy shunts. The seam between it and the neck ring was a hinge with a soft polymer gasket meant to move with the wearer's shoulder, and the tungsten head found the gasket and went through the collar under it and stopped inside the man. He folded. He folded exactly the way Ted had said. Silently, his beam rifle went into the snow with a small dry sound, and his helmet lamp painted a wide, slow smear of light across the porch as he sank. The other 10 mercenaries had time to blink. That was all. Ted was already moving. He was moving low, and he was moving fast for a man his age, and he was moving into them, and not away, which was the last thing anyone in that wedge had been told to expect. The second mercenary raised his caster. Ted came up under the caster and drove the flat of the axe head into the man's throat under the helmet rim, and while the man was still trying to remember what a throat felt like, Ted twisted the axe and set the beard of the head against the same hinge, the neck ring hinge always, and pulled. The mercenary sat down suddenly and did not get up. 2 down, 9 to go. The wedge, for the first time, understood that the wedge was inside out. They opened fire. Plasma bolts went past Ted and turned the snowbank behind him into steam. One of them punched a hole through the porch post beside his ear. He did not flinch. He did not stop. He was already behind the third mercenary, and the third mercenary had been turning to shoot at where Ted had been, which is a mistake a man makes exactly once. The axe came down along the seam of the elbow joint. The arm and the caster came off together. The mercenary screamed, a real scream, high and boyish under the armored voice box, and Ted took him in the hinge of the greave with the backswing and left him. 3. Krogateshvar, watching through the viewing slit, felt the cold of the shed at her back and the cold of a colder thing at her spine. She had been told, in her academy long ago, that Terrans were an interesting species. High-density musculature owed to their high-gravity homeworld, unusual tolerance for pain, endurance out of proportion to their frames, occasional bursts of speed. She had also been told that plasma armor rendered projectile weapons, including cinematic pre-war implements like axes and swords, obsolete. She had been told this by an instructor with 3 degrees and no scars. She watched now as an old widower with a fire axe worked the seams of alloyed plasma harnesses the way she had seen a butcher work the joints of a carcass. Not with speed, not with rage, with knowledge. He knew where the plates ended and where the flexible gaskets began. He knew where the hinges were, and the axe head knew nothing about how strong the plates were, because the axe head was not asking the plates, it was asking the hinges, and the hinges answered every time. 4. A mercenary tried to run, and the axe caught him behind the knee at the joint, and the joint gave. 6. Vralkosh finally understood he was in a fight. Vralkosh had killed 111 sentient beings in his career, most of them personally. He stopped laughing. He raised his ornate caster, an oversized model with a shielded barrel and a trifocus lens, and he told his squad through the throat mic to fall back into a firing arc and burn the entire porch to slag. The squad, what remained of it, tried to obey. It is very hard to obey a fallback order when the reason you are falling back is walking through you. The 7th mercenary died with the axe head in the base of his gorget. The 8th died with the shaft of the axe across his windpipe and the old man's boot against his knee. The 9th got a clean shot off, and Krogateshvar saw it hit, a bright wet flare against Ted's left side, low, near the hip. She saw him stagger, she saw him not fall. He turned to the 9th mercenary. He said something the throat mic did not carry. He killed him with a downward stroke that split the helm from crown to jaw. The 10th mercenary threw down his weapon. He raised his hands. He was very young. His voice box slipped a syllable and gave him a boy's tenor. He said, in trade dialect, please. He said, in his own tongue, a mother's name. Ted looked at him. Ted lowered the axe. Go home, he said. Go home and tell them who they came for. Go home and tell them where his sister is buried. Do you understand me? The boy, 19 human years, Krogateshvar, would learn later, nodded so fast his helmet knocked against his gorget. Go, the boy went. He ran into the trees. His running lights blinked back into darkness. Ted turned to Vralkosh. Vralkosh had fired twice while the old man was letting the boy go. Both bolts had gone into Ted's back. Ted was still standing. Krogateshvar later would try to describe what she saw next to her mother's mother in a distant hall. She would fail. The old man walked at Vralkosh. He walked as if the 2 blast craters smoking in his back were a mildly annoying reminder to fix a leak in a roof. His breath came shallow and short. His left leg dragged a half-inch. He walked. Vralkosh, who had never in his life had a man walk at him after 2 clean hits from a shielded caster, took a step back, then a second. Then Vralkosh, Justicar of the Reach, veteran of 11 campaigns, ran. Ted stopped in the middle of the yard. He watched the ornate helm disappear into the tree line. He rested the head of the axe on the snow and leaned on the shaft. He was breathing like a bellows with a slow leak. Something dark and slow was making its way down the inside of his left trouser leg. He turned toward the shed. He raised his free hand and made a small tired gesture. Come out. Krogateshvar, matriarch of the Renvorig clan, opened the shed door and crossed a yard full of dead mercenaries to a widowed carpenter who was quietly bleeding to death, standing up. She helped him inside. She sat him on the low bench by the stove. She peeled his coat off him herself because his hands would not cooperate anymore, and she saw the 3 wounds, the front hip and the 2 in the back, and she saw that the front and back wounds were the same wound. The bolt had gone through him without hitting a hip joint, and the 2 in the back had missed the spine by a hair and cauterized themselves halfway on the way out. You need a physician, she said. Her voice through the box shook, which surprised her because she had not heard her own voice shake in 7 years. There's no physician on this moon, Ted said. He said it patiently. He said it the way he would explain to a child that the stove was hot. Bring me the tin case, top shelf. Green one, and the bottle of clear. She brought them. He did his own work. He did it sitting on the bench in his own kitchen, in a shirt full of new holes, with his own hands, while a matriarch of the Vornkal stood over him and did not know where to put her own eyes. He heated a probe. He fished slag out of the hip wound. He poured the clear over each hole in turn and did not make a sound, though his jaw stood out in a line. He stapled the front closed with a small Carpenter stapler he had modified for the purpose in some long-ago winter. He stapled the 2 exits himself, contorting to reach them. Do not be gentle, he said to her at one point when she reached uncertainly to help. Push it, push the meat back into the hole. She did as she was told. She was not accustomed to being told, but she did as she was told. He did not thank her when she was done, because he did not need to. She understood. She wiped her hands on a cloth and looked away. He drank the clear. Then he set the bottle down and looked past her at Vralkosh's discarded rucksack, which one of the mercenaries had dropped in the snow. Bring me that, he said. She brought it. He rifled it one-handed. He came out with a slim tablet the size of a handspan, silver-edged, encrypted. He tapped it. A pale blue script filled its surface. His pale eyes tracked left to right, his mouth thinned. "Read it," he said, and handed it up to her. She read. The header of the file was a seal she knew. It was the seal of the Reach Duke Osuvin Threll. Below it, in a coldly formatted line, Priority Contract 7 Alpha. Target, Ren Vorag Metriarch and Dependents. Location, Halbrun 4. Complication, potential presence of Ashen Line survivor. Rifleman First Class T. Voss, human male, 62 Terran years, retired active. Threat estimate, nil. Note, subject registered as woodworker. Recommend surprise entry via wedge formation. She looked up. "The Ashen Line," she said. "Read the rest." She read it. There was more. There was a small subheader below the primary. OSS Uvin Threll, Private Annex, Eyes Only. Ashen Line, 32 of 35 confirmed. 3 remain. See attached names. She scrolled. 3 names. The first she did not know. The second she did not know. The third read, Voss, T, subject present. Ted's mouth had gone into a straight line and stayed there. He had heard the names in his own head as she read them without her needing to speak the first 2 aloud, because he had known those 2 names for 31 winters. "Who was the second?" Krogateshvara asked quietly. "The second name." "My sister." She had not expected that answer. She stopped scrolling. "Buried on Terra," he said, "in the city where I was born, in a snow that fell the same night I got the burn on my back. She had come to meet me at the shuttle port. She had come to bring me home. She was standing beside me when the round came in. The round was not meant for me. It was meant for anyone in an Ashen Line uniform, and she was standing next to one, and she was pregnant." Krogateshvar did not know what to say. She had watched 3 of her own children die at the mouth of a plasma vent on Yermkusek, and she had said nothing on any of the 3 days after. She said nothing now. "Duluth," Ted said. The city was called Duluth, on a lake that froze 8 months out of the year. My father hauled stone for the trade. He taught me to swing an axe when I was 7. It is a strange thing to grow up hauling stone in the cold of a mining town, and then to find yourself 20 years later in a light regiment on a hill on a world nobody has heard of, with a rifle you did not want. Watching a man in gilt armor order a strafing run on a hospital tent full of your own wounded because the wounded were slowing the retreat. The tablet was still in Krogateshvara's hand. She looked down at the seal of Osuvin Threll. He was there. He was the officer who gave the order. He was a captain then. He was not a duke yet. He is a duke now because he took the credit for what the Ashen Line held. And he took the credit because there was nobody left to disagree, or so he thought. 32 of 35, Krogateshvara said. He hunted us for 31 winters, quietly, one at a time. The old survivors of the line. He killed my company sergeant on Eva Prime, and it went into the record as a mining accident. He killed the medic who dressed my burn on a maglev platform in Petrogorod, and it went into the record as a drunk brawl. He killed my sister on the day she came to meet me at the shuttle port, and it went into the record as a stray round. I put myself on this moon because I ran out of ways to lose him. And now, 31 winters later, he sent 11 of his own to my door in a wedge because a matriarch he wanted dead ran to the same hole I ran to. He looked up. His face was gray. "You did not bring them," he said. "They came for you and for me at the same time. That is not luck. That is a ledger being closed." Krogateshvar sat down on the bench opposite him and set the tablet on the table between them. Her hand did not shake. She had trained it not to shake in front of subordinates 20 years ago, and the training held. "He will come," she said. "He will come. He will not come with mercenaries this time. No, he will come himself. Why? Because he has to see it done. Because he has looked at that annex every night for 31 winters, and there are 3 names left, and one of the 3 killed his justicar and 8 of his men with a fire axe and let a boy go home to tell the story. He will not send another wedge. He will come. He will come in a personal shuttle. He will come with a small honor guard. He will come to plant his flag in my kitchen and take a hologram of it home and put an end to a story he has been telling himself for a very long time. When Ted looked out the window at the sky, the wind had died. The snow had thinned. A pale gray line was thickening at the horizon. Before noon, Krogoteshvar rose. She crossed the room to the black bogwood chair, where her daughter had woken and sat up and was rubbing her small clawed knuckles against her eyes. The child looked up. Krogoteshvar did something she had not done in years. She knelt in front of the chair and put both her armored hands on the child's shoulders and pressed her forehead very gently to her daughter's forehead. The child did not understand why. The child let her mother do it. She rose. She turned. She looked at Ted. "How can I help?" He almost smiled. It was not a smile of pleasure. It was the small, tired smile a man gives to something inevitable that has finally arrived. "You'll help by staying alive," he said. "You'll help by keeping the child in that chair. That's the whole of it. I am a hunter. I have taken heads. I have killed a justicar of the Reach in single combat when I was younger than you are now. Do not tell me to sit." "I am not telling you to sit," he said. He set his jaw against the pane and stood. He tested his weight on the left leg. It held, though not well. "I am telling you not to let the child out of that chair. If he steps into this room, he steps in expecting a bleeding old man on a bench. He does not step in expecting an armored matriarch behind him. That is a card. I do not want to spend that card at the door. I want to spend it in the shuttle." "You understand?" She understood. She did not like it. She understood. "When you go to the shuttle," she said, "you go with more than an axe. I'll go with the axe. You will not." She unslung her rifle. It was a bullpup carbine of Vornhall design, the barrel shorter than her forearm, the magazine well curled behind the pistol grip like the tail of a scorpion. It fired a solid tungsten cord penetrator at a velocity high enough to bore through a light armored transport at close range. She had carried it since her first campaign. She set it on the table. "He will have shield generators on the shuttle." "Yes, and on his person." "Yes. You cannot swing an axe through a personal shield." "No. Then you take this. This will." He looked at the carbine. He looked at her. He did not touch it. "Personal shields drop when they think they've done their job," he said. "A projectile above a certain velocity, they catch. Below that velocity, they let through." It was designed by an engineer in Reach Central who wanted the wearer to still be able to pick up a coffee cup without being knocked out of his chair. It is not a wall. It is a filter. The axe is below the threshold. The axe is a man's arm swinging a piece of tungsten at a pace a hand can move. Yes, it is below the threshold. It does not tickle the senses. It goes through the shield like a slow rain through a mosquito net. It hits the seam of the gorget the way it hit every seam this morning. And gorgets have hinges. Krogoteshvar sat down slowly. "You are telling me," she said, "that the whole of the Reach's armored infantry doctrine has a hole in it the size of a woodsman's arm." "I am telling you," Ted said, "that a rifle bolt at 3,000 meters per second reads to the shield as a threat. A tungsten wedge at 4 meters per second reads to the shield as a bee. That is why I did not go for the rifle behind the woodpile last night, and I have not gone for it in 31 years. He is expecting a rifle. He will feel his shield twitch when a rifle sings. He will not feel it twitch when I am close enough to touch his collar. But the shield will catch the axe if it moves fast enough. Yes, which is why I am not going to move fast." He limped to the shelf and took down the fire axe. He examined the head in the light. He wiped a streak of frozen blood off it with his thumb. He looked at her again. "Have you a knife?" She had a knife. It was a black glass thing as long as her forearm, ceremonial in appearance and profoundly not ceremonial in function. She unstrapped it from her thigh and offered it hilt first. He took it. He tested the edge on the pad of his thumb. He nodded once. "That will do for the honor guard." "You cannot fight the honor guard with a knife." "I do not need to." "You will." She waited. Here is what will happen, he said. He sat down on the bench again because his left leg was shaking and he did not want it to shake in her sight for very long. He will land in the yard at midday. He will come out with 3 or 4. He will call to me first. He will make a speech. He is a duke. He cannot help himself. During the speech I will step out of the door. I will look old. I will look bled out. I will look ready to die. He will send the honor guard forward because he does not want the axe within his personal shield if he can help it. When the honor guard is in the yard between the shuttle and me, you come around the north wall of the house behind them. You do not shoot, you cut throats. 2-3 seconds each. Do not let one of them turn. And then the honor guard will be dead, and it will be him and me in the middle of the yard, and he will draw, and I will let him draw, and then I will walk into his shield, and I will find the hinge. Krogateshvar looked at him a long time. You will die, she said. Probably, he said. He set the axe against his knee and picked up his cup and took a long swallow of a coffee that had gone cold 3 hours before. He grimaced at it. You will die, she said again, and the cub will grow up in this chair, and the story of the widowed carpenter who took 11 of Ossovan Threll's mercenaries with a fire axe will pass through my clan for 6 generations, and it will be a true story, but you will still be dead. Yes, I am not comfortable with this arithmetic. You are not required to be. She did not answer. She stood, she checked the load in her carbine anyway, because a warrior checks a load whether she plans to use it or not, and she crossed back to the window to watch the pale gray line at the horizon. Behind her, Ted began to sharpen the axe. It took him a long time. He was slow because his left arm did not want to move above his hip anymore, and the file kept slipping in his fingers. He did not curse. He did not ask for help. He filed. The little rasping metallic sound filled the cabin. The cubs, curled on the bogwood chair, watched him with wide yellow eyes. The elder Tork Malkroon, awake now, watched him from the low bench. Nobody spoke. Then, quietly, without looking up from the axe head, Ted began to talk. He did not seem to be talking to anybody in particular. He talked about Duluth. He talked about the way the lake iced over in November, and the way the whole city smelled of iron and pine smoke, and the way his father's back had bent by the time he was 50 from hauling stone. He talked about his mother, who had taught him to plane wood in a shed behind the house and had never in her life raised her voice. He talked about Marta, whom he had met in a shipyard cafeteria on his 2nd furlough, and who had laughed at his shyness on the first evening and taken his hand on the 2nd and asked him to marry her on the 3rd. He talked about the twin sons they had lost to a fever the winter before he shipped out for the Ashen Line, and about the girl child they were going to try for when he came home, and about the fact that he had come home and she had, for reasons that were her own, decided not to. He talked about his sister, who had learned to weld at 15 and outshouted a foreman at 19 and been standing at the shuttle port with a jacket over her shoulders and a small hand-lettered sign that said "Brother," the day the stray round hit her under the collarbone and turned her death record into a paragraph. He talked about how he had held her on the platform. He talked about how the medic who came running was one of the medics from the Ashen Line, and how she had looked at him with an expression that he had not been able to unremember since. He talked about the 12 years he had spent trying to remember to be angry at Ossovan Threll, and how the anger, over time, had gone from a hot thing to a cold thing, and the cold thing had followed him around for another 19 years. And now it sat like an old dog at his feet by the stove and looked up at him with pale eyes that were his own. He talked. The file rasped. Nobody in the room moved. When he was done, he said, "I have not said any of that out loud in 31 winters." Krogateshvar did not turn from the window. She said, "It is well said." Outside, in the pale gray line at the horizon, a small dark shape appeared. It grew a second shape. It grew a fin. It grew edges of guilt. "They are here," she said. Ted set the file down. He tested the edge of the axe against the pad of his thumb. He nodded once, to himself, the way a carpenter nods when a joint fits. "On time," he said. "That's a duke for you." The gilt shuttle came in low and slow, showing off. It banked once around the cabin so that the sunlight caught on the fluted plating of its underbelly and threw ribbons of yellow light through the falling snow. It hovered, it descended. It settled onto the yard on a hush of anti-grav that melted a circle of the drift beneath it and left a wet, dark ring on the ground. Its ramp lowered with a small mechanical sigh. Nobody stepped out for a long moment. Ted stood in the doorway of the cabin with the axe at his side. He did not lean on it, though he wanted to. His mackintosh was open at the throat. His face was very gray. He looked at the shuttle and he waited. The Reach Duke Osofen Threll came down the ramp on his own two legs, and Kroga Teshvar, from behind the north wall where she was crouched with her ceremonial knife in her teeth, felt something old and very bad move in her stomach. He was tall. He was very tall, taller than a full-grown Vornkal, and thin, and dressed in a long coat of black scaled leather trimmed in gold thread. His skin was the pale blue of an ice shelf under a low sun, and his eyes were black from lid to lid, no whites, no color, only depth. He carried no visible weapon. He did not need to. The air around him shimmered faintly with a personal shield that Kroga Teshvar's trained eye read at a threshold high enough to stop small arms fire indefinitely. Behind him, in a slow wedge of four, came his honor guard in armor a shade heavier than the mercenaries, plating layered like the scales of a bad fish, faceplates opaqued black. He walked to the middle of the yard and stopped. His honor guard fanned out. He looked at Ted for a long, unhurried moment. He smiled. He had a small, pleasant smile. Rifleman First Class Voss. His voice carried. It was a beautiful voice. It was the voice of a man who had been told all his life that his voice was beautiful and who had chosen to believe it. "You look tired, Rifleman." Ted said nothing. "You do not have to look tired for very long." Ted still said nothing. "I have come a long way," the Duke said, "to close a small book. I would like it, before I close it, if you would tell me two things. It would be a kindness to an old adversary." Ted did not answer. The Duke inclined his head and continued anyway, as if the not answering had been an answer. "First, tokens. Named, how did you know it was me, on that hill? Because I've never been sure, in all these years, whether you saw the insignia or whether it was the medic who told you later. It is a small vanity of mine, to know. Second, does it comfort you at all, in this last hour, to know that after you the ledger is only 2 lines, only 2. And I have been very patient with those 2, and they are old and slow and unarmed, and by the season's turn my 35 will be 35. Ted said, quietly, "You forgot the boy." The Duke's smile did not move. "Which boy?" "The one I sent home. He'll tell them where you were this morning. He'll tell them where you were tonight." The Duke waved a hand. "The mercenary. I will have him found and quieted before he reaches a jump gate. This is not a difficult problem." "It is a bigger problem than you think," Ted said, "because he was your Justice's cousin. Vralkosh's mother's youngest sister's boy. First contract at 19. Vralkosh brought him along to teach him. Vralkosh ran into the trees when I let the boy live. Vralkosh, who has heard exactly what I let the boy live to say, is by now telling every friend he still has in the barracks that a 62-year-old carpenter on a snowball moon took the whole squad with a fire axe because he was on the private list of a Reach Duke who was supposed to be hunting orc matriarchs. That is not a story that stays in the barracks." The Duke's smile stayed. The eyes above it went a small degree darker. "You are lying." "I am not lying. I am rarely amused enough to lie. You will find, when you get back to Reach Central, that the boy's name has been called in 3 of the mid-tier houses by tomorrow morning. You will find that your ledger has become inconveniently public. That is what happens when you send a wedge instead of coming yourself. That is what happens when you underestimate what an old carpenter can do to your intel." The Duke's honor guard shifted uneasily. The Duke made a small gesture with 2 fingers to hold them. "You are stalling, Rifleman." "I am talking. Talking is not stalling. Stalling would be if I were waiting for something. And you are not waiting for something. No, he was, of course. He was waiting for Krogateshvar. He was waiting for her to be in position. He heard, faintly, the small crunch of her boot on packed snow at the north corner of the cabin, and he did not turn his head. The Duke, who did not hear it, misread the delay as reluctance. He straightened, his smile faded to a professional line. He nodded to his honor guard. Take him. The 4 honor guard stepped forward together in a slow, deliberate wedge, casters low and ready. Krogateshvar moved. She moved the way her people had been designed to move by a long, cold planet with dense forests and short daylight, which is to say, she moved without any noise at all. She came around the north corner of the cabin in a low, silent lope, and she was in among the honor guard before the honor guard registered the shadow. Her ceremonial knife found the first throat under the neck ring. An armored honor guard does not close the gorget seam at the throat when he expects to be doing the killing rather than the dying. A small vanity of the reach, and she rode the body down and rolled off it and put the same blade through the second guard's inner elbow and out through the plate on the other side, where the plating was thin because the wearer thought nothing would ever reach him from the inside. She was on the third before the third could turn. The 4th guard turned. The 4th guard got a shot off. The shot went wide because the 4th guard was firing at a shape that had already moved. Krogateshvar came inside the caster on her second stride and drove the knife up under the chin guard and lifted him half off his feet with it, and he was dead before his heels came down. 4 honor guard, 9 seconds. Osivin Threl looked at his dead honor guard. He looked at Ted. He drew. He drew a weapon that had been holstered inside the fold of his coat, a small, elegant thing the size of a hand, silver-chased and personal, a plasma repeater with a shielded barrel, hair-triggered, calibrated. He drew it very fast. He fired it twice into Ted's chest. Ted staggered. He did not fall. The bolts had gone into him, one under the collarbone and one below the heart, and he stood with them steaming in him and looked at Osifan Threl and took one step forward. Krogateshvar, over the body of the 4th honor guard, whispered a prayer to a moon her grandmother's grandmother had prayed to. Ted took a second step. The Duke's personal shield hummed around him, a subtle distortion of the air at arm's length. Ted's face had gone the color of the snow. His breath came in small, hitched, shallow pools. He took a third step. He was inside the shield now. He was close enough to smell the Duke's incense, close enough to see the delicate tracery of gold under the black scales of the collar. The Duke fired a third time, so close that the bolt burned a channel across the top of Ted's ear. Ted did not turn his head. "You do not," the Duke said, and there was for the first time something in his voice that was not the beautiful voice. "You do not understand what you are doing." "I understand exactly what I'm doing," Ted said. He set his boot. He raised the axe. He said, "The hinge, always." The tungsten head came down. It came down slowly, the way it had come down 11 times in a snowy yard at dawn, the way a man swings a tool he has swung 100,000 times in his life. It went through the personal shield like a slow rain through mosquito netting. It found the seam at the base of the Duke's gilt gorget on the left side, where a delicate polymer hinge allowed the throat plate to move with the wearer's speech. The polymer parted, the plating under it parted. The Duke's beautiful voice made one small startled sound. The head kept moving. It kept moving until it stopped, deep in the notch under the collarbone where a rich Duke's blood pooled thickest. Asuvin Threl's black-on-black eyes went round. He looked at Ted. Ted looked back at him. Ted was very, very tired. "I do not," Ted said, in the same tone he had used to a boy in a plasma-armored helmet at dawn. "Do windows." The Duke folded. Ted let the axe slip from his hands. He put his palm on the loading ramp to steady himself, and he stood there for a long moment breathing, and then he sat down on the ramp because his left leg was no longer going to hold him. Krogateshvar crossed the yard. She reached him. She reached down. She said, in a voice she did not run through the translator, in her own tongue that only she could understand, a word that meant something like brother, or comrade, or father. He looked up. He almost smiled. "Get the axe," he said, "then get me inside. Then bring me a real cup of coffee. And take the rest of the week off." All of you, on me." She got the axe. She got him inside. She sent one of the cubs to the shed for the coffee tin, and the cub went at a full run, because the cub had understood, in the way that children of all species do, that the shape of the room had changed, and the shape had changed for the good. Krogoteshvar sat the old man down on the low bench by the stove. She peeled his coat off him again. She wept once quietly into the crook of her elbow so that the cubs would not see, and she put her hands to his wounds. He did not die. He came very close. He came so close that in the middle of the third day the elder Tork Malkrun stood over him and began the low humming song that his people sang to men who were about to leave. But on the fourth day the fever broke, and on the fifth day he opened his eyes and asked in a hoarse voice whether the coffee had been ruined by boiling too long. Krogoteshvar laughed. She had not laughed in 11 years. News of what had happened in the yard on Halbrand 4 traveled the way she had told the Duke it would travel, through the mouth of a 19-year-old mercenary named Kesh, and through the mouth of a justicer named Vralkosh, who had run into a tree line at dawn and had not stopped running until he was 3 systems away. It traveled through the mid-tier houses of the Reach in 3 days. It traveled through the outer colonies in a week. It traveled in the mouths of small Vornkul children in the form of a song. The song was not accurate. The song made the axe glow. The song made the carpenter 12 feet tall. But the song remembered, and remembering was enough. By the end of the first month, the Reach Council had held an emergency conclave. By the end of the second, the annex file called Ashen Line had been publicly opened by the son of one of the mid-tier houses, who was ambitious and unafraid, and the son had ridden the scandal into a seat on the council. By the end of the third, the 2 remaining names on the annex list had been quietly contacted, quietly protected, and quietly told that a man on a frozen moon had already done for them what they had feared for 31 winters. One of them wept. The other went for a walk in a rain he had not been able to walk in without fear since he was a young soldier, and he walked for a long time. The Renvorag clan, in the same 3 months, was granted formal amnesty by the successor to the Reach Duke's holdings, a distant cousin who had never liked Oseven Threl and who was very glad to be seen not liking him now. Krogoteshvar was reinstated as matriarch. She refused, for reasons she did not explain, to return to her ancestral hold on Yermkul Sek. She built a smaller hold on Halbrand 4 instead, at the mouth of a valley 2 ridges east of a carpenter's cabin, and she began to trade in bogwood. The cubs grew. The smaller one, Tesh, learned to plane wood at the elbow of the widowed carpenter, and by the time she was as tall as his shoulder, she could hang a door in a Terran style so tight the wind could not find the gap. The elder Tork Malkrun took over the carpentry accounts, because his written trade dialect was more precise than the old man's, and he liked to argue with the merchants on the coast about the price of iron nails. The song about the axe went on being sung, and slowly the song began to correct itself, as songs will, so that eventually the axe did not glow anymore, and the carpenter was only 6 feet tall and had a bad left leg, which was the truth. Ted Voss lived 7 more winters. He did not build any more extra chairs because there was no need. The bogwood chair he had built the winter Marta died was, from the 4th day after the Duke's death onward, occupied every evening at supper by one Vornkal or another, the smaller cub, most nights because she was smallest and it fit her best. Krogoteshvar, on the nights she came in from the hold to eat stew with him, which were more nights than not. The elder Tork Malkrun, on nights when the cold in his joints was very bad and he wanted the seat closest to the stove. The chair was warm. The chair was always warm. On the last morning of the last winter, Ted Voss sat down at his kitchen table with a bowl of stew and could not lift the spoon. Krogoteshvar, who had known this morning would come for the last 3 months and had refused to leave the cabin for any of the days, sat down across from him and picked up the spoon herself and fed him 3 slow, careful mouthfuls of a stew he had made himself the day before. He swallowed. He looked at her over the rim of the third spoonful. He said, in a voice that was very small, "Keep the chair." "I will keep the chair," she said. He closed his eyes. The wind on Halbrun 4 raked the roof one more time. The stove ticked. He did not wake up. She kept the chair. She kept it in the same place at the same table, and every winter for the rest of her long Vornchal life she planed a new chair from black bogwood and placed it beside the old one, and ate her stew in silence, while the wind raked the roof and the snow traveled sideways past the window, patient as an army. On the wall above the table she hung a fire axe, the head dulled to gray by weather, the hickory shaft worn to the shape of a hand, and beneath it, in her own careful script in the trade dialect he had spoken, she wrote 3 words a widowed carpenter had once said to a duke in the snow. "The hinge, always." That's the story. Take a breath. The real strength of a man is not the size of his fists or the caliber of his rifle. It is the number of things he will not let the world take from him, his people, his dead, his empty chair at the table, and the quiet, unshowy patience with which he keeps them safe. If this story sat with you, do the smallest thing that keeps stories like this alive. Leave your like. It costs you nothing, and it tells the algorithm to keep sending you sci-fi tales of the human who refuses to break. Share it with someone who loves stories about the underestimated soul who stands up when it matters most. Subscribe and tap the little bell so you never miss the next HFY tale we build for you. And here is the one thing we want to know from you tonight in the comments. If a matriarch of the Vonachal knocked on your door in the middle of a blizzard with 2 frightened cubs and an army coming behind her, would you set out one more chair for her at your table, or would you bar the door and pretend you weren't home? Tell us which one you are. We read every answer. Keep your eyes on the empty seat across the table and keep looking up at the stars.